It's the SNL Hall of Fame podcast with Chief Conversationalist Thomas Senna. Featuring Matt Ardill. And now, curator of the hall, JD.
Thank you so much, Doug Danance. It's me, JD, and we're back with our annual Don Pardo Award episode. Previously on this program, we've celebrated Mr. Pardo himself, as well as the Saturday Night Live band last year. The SNL Hall of Fame podcast is a weekly affair where each episode we take a deep dive into the career of a former cast member, host, musical guest, or writer, and add them to the ballot for your consideration. Once the nominees have been announced, we turn to you, the listener, to vote for the most deserving and help determine who will be enshrined for perpetuity in the hall. And that's how we play the game, folks. It's just that simple. Only this week, we aren't playing that game. Now, wipe your feet and follow me to the conference room. Matt and Joe are waiting for us to break down this year's award winner. There they are. Matt, how you doing this evening?
Hey, JD, I'm good. And yourself?
I'm fabulous. I love these episodes. And I love that today is the first day that voting opened.
Yeah. Can't wait to see how it all turns out.
Yeah, so remember that. If you're listening to this, voting is now open. And it closes December 13th. Ooh, Friday, December 13th. Look out for Jason Voorhees when you're voting. And you're eligible to vote right up until midnight of that night and Eastern time. So there's that. Joe, how about you, buddy?
I'm doing good. Out of the break room and into the conference room, ready to do this.
Oh, love it. I hope you brought your water bottle anyway.
Yes, sir, I did.
All right. Well, let's get right into this. You know, there's often a lot of talk about saving Saturday Night Live. And for my money, our award winner this year has to be near the top of the list. 1 or 1A anyway. This is somebody who has been on the ballot for 3 years and has not been elected the way people are traditionally brought into the Hall of Fame, but he is now removed from the ballot because he is this year's Don Pardo Award winner. And of course, I'm talking about Dick Ebersol. So we're going to get a bit of a breakdown on Dick Ebersol. And really, the way we thought about it was there's two distinct sort of eras. And so Matt is going to handle the early era and Joe is going to take care of the latter era, and ne'er the twain shall meet. No, I'm just joking. All right, Matt, kick it.
Awesome. Okay, Dick Ebersol, born July 28th, 1947 in Torrington, Connecticut, son of Mary and Charles Roberts Ebersol. He dropped out of Yale in 1967 to join the ABC sports team as television's first Olympic researcher. That's how he started his career that has spanned decades. In 1974, Barry Diller, CEO of Paramount at the time, pushed him to jump ship to NBC, where he had been offered a position as in late night programming as the vice president of late night. And this is at the age of 28. He was the first vice president of NBC under the age of 30. And in many ways, it's the lessons that he learned in sports broadcasting that would serve him in helping with the creation of the beast that we now know as SNL. Of his journey to NBC, he said in the oral history of SNL, live from New York, in the spring of 1974, I was approached by NBC to come over to essentially run their sports department. At the time, I was Rooney Ulrich's assistant at ABC. I said no. I think they were in shock. I mean, how could somebody who was 27 turn that down? But I felt they didn't take sports seriously. They wouldn't give it the resources or wouldn't put the resources into it. And besides, I didn't want to compete against the best person who'd ever done it before or since, Rooney. My saying no apparently impressed them, so Herbert Schlosser, the president of NBC, so lo and behold, in the summer of 1974, Schlosser invited me to his place on Fire Island, along with Marvin Antwowski, one of the programming executives, and basically laid the whole thing out. How Johnny Carson had given them fair warning he didn't want weekend repeats of The Tonight Show to exist after the summer of 1975. They had begun to order up some specials. One had Burt Reynolds sort of hosting. It was talky. It had some comedy bits for the time period. I was intrigued, even though I had no background whatsoever in late night. I had been a sports kid since I dropped out of Yale to work for Rooney in 1967. I told Rooney that I was leaving the same morning Nixon resigned. I had a whole deal to come over to NBC as head of weekend late night programming. I had 1 year to come up with a show to go into that time period. And that show, if the show is creatively sound, I had Herb's word I would get 6 months on the air. So with a year and, as Jake and Elwood would call it, a mission from God, Dick started mixing the right ingredients in the fall of 1974. So after digging for a while, he realized the only way to make this work would be if it skewed towards a younger audience, an audience who would be up late, either getting ready to go out or coming home from the club. So he needed to lean into that. If Monday to Friday was for Mr. and Mrs. America watching Johnny, then Saturday night would be for the hippies, the punks, and the freaks, the teens who were out protesting and screaming and reading Mad Magazine. At first, he approached Richard Pryor. This would lead to some of the early season's first hosts who helped establish the tone of the show. It was Dick who got Pryor, Carlin, Tomlin, Steve Martin, and Linda Ronstadt to be a part of the project. And in fact, that was supposed to be the very first lineup, the original cast, when he started working on this project, which would have been bonkers, to be honest. Shortly after he approached Richard Pryor, he was approached by Sandy Warnick, an agent at ICM, who brought him Lorne Michaels. He already had a really impressive resume with his time on the CBC and subsequent gigs in the States, working on specials, as well as being a line producer on Laugh-In. Lorne came in hot with a pitch based on Kentucky Fried Theater, which honestly didn't land, but he formed a really good rapport with Dick. Dick kept him in mind as the project sort of developed. Then that Christmas, Pryor got cold feet, and the first iteration fell apart. Pryor didn't think that NBC would let him do his thing. And, to be fair, they didn't. Like, when the Richard Pryor sketch show came on, even though it had some revolutionary sketches, it only lasted 4 episodes. So he was in the right. But once he bailed, Schlosser suggested to Dick that they come back to New York, set up base in 8H, and then build a project from there. Pulling in Lorne, who he felt was the closest to a contemporary he had on this project, they started riffing on what to do. Like in the movie Saturday Night, they didn't know. There was no pitch. There was no idea. It was all Lorne bullshitting. And that bullshit wowed Ebersol. It took his breath away. It was all about how he wanted to have the first in history of television TV show to talk, absent the expletives, the same language that was being talked on college campuses, on streets, and everywhere else. Dick sold that idea to NBC, saying that he wanted 2 people for the show. He wanted this guy, Lorne Michaels, to produce, his words, and he wanted Don Ohlmeyer to direct. Yes, the same Don Ohlmeyer who years later would fire Norm Macdonald for the OJ jokes. Now, setting up a breakfast meeting with NBC, to which Lorne protested because quite obviously he is not and never has been a morning person. Dick insisted that Lorne show up, and he did. And he put on his BS show for the stiffs, as Ebersol called them. They didn't get Lorne. They thought he was way too young, but they did like his enthusiasm, and they liked Dick, so they let Dick have him. The next day, Don came in for an interview. They loved him, but Rooney wouldn't let him out of his ABC contract, so he didn't make the jump to NBC until 2 years later, and was not again involved in SNL until many years after that, because he was the best friend of OJ and didn't like his buddy being made fun of by a Canadian comedy icon. So a very different relationship with SNL, but it's an interesting connection. During the contract dispute with Carson, a vacancy was created on weekends, which Dick Ebersol and Herbert Schlosser, teaming up with Lorne Michaels, filled that gap. If you've watched the film Saturday Night, it captures the dynamic of the working relationship they have quite well in those early days. Dick was the bridge between corporate and creative, young and savvy enough to get it, but corporate enough to know that he needed to run interference. A fan of football, he was in a way the lineman, blocking the corporate stiffs from sacking Lorne, the QB. In Live from New York, Dick Ebersol described their dynamic at the time like this. If you ask Lorne what I contributed to the show, what I think he would say is that during that time of development, that stage, and the launch, I created an island on which he could exist, and no one else could touch him. And from that island, a great kaiju of sketch comedy escaped, climbing 30 Rockefeller Place, Fay Ray in hand, obviously played by Gilda, and changed the world of comedy forever.
Matt, that is some good stuff. That was really wild. I didn't realize. I still haven't seen Saturday Night.
Really?
So
yeah, it really does do a very good job of capturing that how Dick was just sort of blocking all the BS from hitting Lorne and letting him being creative. So it fudges some of the details, skews some of the timelines, but it really does capture that very well.
Now, from there, Dick Ebersol remained in that role, or a role thereabout. But then something happened on the show. In season 5, or after season 5, everybody left. Basically gone. And they needed to start from scratch. That's where Joe comes in with the latter story of Dick Ebersol. Joe, take it away, my friend.
So after the first 5 years, the show was going to continue on, basically in name only. Lorne left, the cast left, but the show was going to go on. Same name, same format, but everything else was different. And Gene Dominion, who was talent coordinator for the first 5 years, was going to take over as executive producer, basically take over Lorne Michaels' job. And from every source that I've seen and read, she did not do a good job. The ratings were down, the sketches were weird, and it was immediately discovered that she needed to be replaced. So, picked by Brandon Tarakoff, who was head of NBC Entertainment at the time, he picked Dick Ebersol to replace Gene Dominion. And he would be what I like to call SNL's stepdad. He would be basically replacing the guy that created Saturday Night Live in the first place. You know, he was in there in the background, and now here he is taking over as executive producer. And he did it with Lorne Michaels' blessing, which personally I think is very classy. He could have just done it just as a professional thing, but he sought out his friend's blessing to do so and went ahead with it after he got it. So, after a month, Dick took over, and after taking a month to retool the show, he took over. 6 cast members were fired, and 3 cast members were hired. Tim Kazurinsky and Robert Duke and Tony Rosato, both who were from SCTV. So then, on April 11th, 1981, the show went on the air, without a host, which is extremely rare, as you may know. However, Chevy Chase, Al Franken did make cameos on Weekend Update. Chevy kind of made cameos throughout the show, and Al Franken made a cameo on Weekend Update. Then a writer's strike basically canceled the rest of the season, and 2 more cast members were fired. So then in the fall of 1981, Lauren suggested that they should add Michael O'Donoghue, a writer from the first 5 years, to be the head writer for Saturday Night Live, starting in season 7. And for that whole year, Dick Ebersol, reluctantly hired him, but for that whole year, butted heads against Michael O'Donoghue. And if you know Michael O'Donoghue's humor, it's good to be mixed in with a sketch comedy show, to have it featured maybe once a week or so, but to have his type of humor for an entire season is kind of tugging on the collar. So I kind of don't blame Dick Ebersol for butting heads with Michael O'Donoghue, even though I think the idea was to have a writer from the first 5 years to be the head writer. But eventually, as the season ended, Dick ended up firing Michael O'Donoghue. So then in the fall of 1982, season 8, pretty much textbook year. Nothing really, too historic to feature here, other than Dick Ebersol was one of the people that went through with the ban and firing of Andy Kaufman from the show via phone-in votes. So that was the season of 82-83, which was season 8. Next year, Dick Ebersol saw that Eddie Murphy, who was the hottest cast member at the time, he saw that Eddie Murphy was doing movies as well as, wanting to be on Saturday Night Live. He didn't want to lose Eddie Murphy, so he had a negotiation and had Eddie pre-tape sketches and had them mixed in to the show as the season went on. And then also, Dick Ebersol saw that when Billy Crystal hosted, he kept him in mind and saw that Billy was a great fit for Saturday Night Live. Which brings us to Dick Ebersol's most famous season from his whole tenure on Saturday Night Live, which is season 10, 1984 to 85. And this is, spoilers, Dick Ebersol's last season. Instead of hiring new cast members, or instead of hiring new talent to be new cast members, Dick Ebersol went out and just got seasoned actors, people who are already famous, to be cast members on the show. So he got Billy Crystal, Martin Short, Christopher Guest, to go along with people who were, Jim Belushi, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who were already cast members on the show. So basically, it was a no-fail situation where it was all to win. However, instead of relying on live sketches, Dick Ebersol started to feature all more pre-taped sketches as the season went on. And then Dick Ebersol had no qualms about firing cast members. And at certain points, he did fire Jim Belushi and Harry Shearer for being toxic people. And they eventually came back, but he had no qualms about firing them. So then that season came to a close, and NBC asked him, what would it take to have you come back in the 85-86 season? And Dick Ebersol just was honest and said, we would have to do the whole thing pre-taped, instead of live, and Billy Crystal would have to be the permanent host. So basically, it went from Saturday Night Live in name only with the format, and Dick Ebersol said, if you want me to come back, it would be not Saturday Night Live. It wouldn't be live, and it wouldn't have the rotating host, and everything that he inherited would be totally different. So obviously, NBC wasn't going to have that. So Dick Ebersol parted ways with Saturday Night Live, and Lauren came back, had an experimental year, And then the year after that, he had the second golden age, and so forth and so forth. So to sum up Dick Ebersol's 80s tenure as executive producer, he did save the show while experimenting, and he kept it on the air. And sure, there was highs and lows. He inherited a low and got it to a high. And he, I think, is responsible for keeping it on the air until Lorne Michaels came back. So we have him to thank for seasons, 6 through 10, and keeping it alive until Lorne came back. So thank you, Dick Ebersol, for that.
Yeah. Some good stuff there, Joe. Interesting. Basically, we have painted a complete picture at this point of Mr. Ebersol and his relationship with Saturday Night Live, which is, of course, important when we're talking about the SNL Hall of Fame. So, let's celebrate Dick Ebersol as the season 6 Don Pardo Award winner, and make sure to get out and vote. You get 15 votes on your ballot. I believe there's 41 names on the ballot. It might be 40 now that we've taken Dick Ebersol off. But it's going to be a tough job, and we want to make sure we get some people in this year because there are some last time ballot holders on there. Anything you want to say, Matt, to close?
I'm just glad we were able to get Dick into the Hall of Fame. I have to say, Joe, that was a very kind way of describing Lorne's season 11 as experimental. It's an infamous season. But yeah, I'm really glad to see Dick inducted into the Hall of Fame and I think the Don Pardo Award is the perfect way to do it. So it makes me really happy, and I'm looking forward to voting and seeing who makes the cut this season.
Absolutely. Joe, any last words from you, my friend?
Yes. Again, he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. And he could have quit after any season, and most likely the show would have been canceled. Regardless of Joe Piscopo, Eddie Murphy, or Martin Short. So Dick Ebersol could have thrown in the towel at any minute. He didn't, and kept it going until Lorne was ready to come back. So the fact that it got to season 10, it was kind of like, well, you can't cancel it now. And, people are kind of getting used to it. It's been on 10 years. And we have Dick to thank for that. And yes, I'm glad that we could thank him by inducting him to the Hall of Fame.
Well put. And on that note, we are going to leave the conference room and get, Matt will go back to his corner and Joe will go down to his lunchroom, and I'll sit at the front bitching about everybody's footwear. So there's that. Please do me one favor, though, as you're leaving, and as you pass the weekend update exhibit, turn out the lights, because the SNL Hall of Fame is now closed.
Thanks for listening to the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. Make sure to rate, review, share, and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media at SNL HOF. This is Doug Denant saying, see you next week.
To podcasts and such.